I'd like to call this special meeting for the Great Island Advisory Committee to order on May 7th at 6:34 p.m. And I just have a couple of items for my report. I want to just remind everybody that Tuesday, May 20th, at the Darien Library, the Museum of Darien and the library and GIAC will be working together to have George Knight from Knight Architecture come and speak. And I think it'll be really, really interesting for the community. And he'll be able to give us a little bit of a perspective on the buildings on the island and how it relates to the master plan. So please remember to join us at 7 o'clock at the library on May 20th. I want to thank the members for their patience during this RSVP process for the shuttle service. And I really want to thank Linda and Karen for all of their work on this while they have their other regular duties. It's really appreciated, and looking forward to seeing everybody on the 17th. So those are my comments. Next up is public comment. Does anybody wish to say anything? If you do, I think you know how to do this, but you go into the chat and you raise your hand, and Felicia will unmute you. And then, well, she'll tell you how she does this. Anybody wish to speak? Okay. Got it. Okay, so next item is this is I think going to be a really interesting meeting. We had a really long meeting a couple of weeks ago, 3.5 hours. So this meeting we're looking at more in the hour and a half range, and we have a lot to cover. And I am going to turn it over to Reed Hildebrand. I think maybe Becca, but not sure.
Thanks so much, Monica. Glad to be with everyone this evening. And I think the hope for our conversation today is really for us to have a chance to listen to all of you and to answer questions about the different options for the future of Great Island that we shared with you 2 weeks ago. And I think with that in mind, we will pull up the presentation that we shared so that we're all looking at the same thing to kind of guide the conversation. But rather than us presenting it, we are thinking of ourselves a little bit more maybe as timekeepers tonight, because we do want to move through the full presentation. I think we're thinking that if we try to allocate roughly something like around 5 minutes for each of the project areas for discussion, that should get us a sort of an hour for covering what the content of the possible futures are. And then given that we have 90 minutes together, plenty of time for sort of more general conversation or to come back and return to specific areas or specific ideas. I think we can move through the kind of front matter pretty quickly. Great. And I think there is a meeting scheduled for next week to talk a little bit more carefully in the field about the pros and cons and challenges of the early access options here. So we're going to table discussion of this until after that meeting, but I think we are getting closer to a good solution for the early access. We go to the next.
Before we move on that,
Sure.
Can we socialize when that meeting's going to be? So if committee members want to attend, we can attend.
Great idea, Bruce.
Thank you.
If we keep going, keep going, keep going. So I think it's probably helpful actually just to slow down on that last slide. I think in general, as we discussed in the last meeting, for the overall, there is a version of a kind of lower level of investment and activation, a medium, and a high. And so this portrait right here represents if you went with all low, all medium, all high. Our hope in the conversation today is that there are probably some conditions that are shared here that really seem desirable, that are high, that maybe want to be prioritized by the committee, that when we have the conversation tonight. Another possibility is that we try to interpret low, medium, and high as a phasing strategy, and that there is an understanding that the evolution of the island over time, let's just imagine something like a 20-year or 25-year window, we could begin with a base or low level of activation and investment, and imagine that eventually the sort of full build out could be something like what's represented in the high. So as we have the conversation tonight, we're hoping that people can be somewhat careful about options that they think really are correct as a possible future for the island, but maybe not something that needs to be moved upon immediately, and could be phased in over time, or things that just don't seem correct for the island and so should be removed from consideration as we think about what goes into the plan for the island. Okay, next. So it perhaps is useful to spend a little bit of time talking about some of these base improvements. And so this is a portrait of the possible invasive management and woodland restoration options. If we go to the next, I think we discussed about the necessity to have some level of signage, and so it's worth talking some about signage too this evening, and potential locations for that signage. Next, this requirement of having really significant infrastructure improvements as part of the base set of improvements for the island. Next. The matter of the envelope and structural stabilization, and in many cases also some hazardous material abatement. Next. And then this is the overall. So I'd like to pause right now for roughly 5 minutes and have some discussion about the idea of these base sort of investments in the future of the island. And I'll mute myself, and I don't know, Monica, if it maybe makes sense for you to moderate a little bit.
Sure.
Should we bring that slide up again that listed the base improvements?
Sure. I think there's sort of multiple slides, really, I guess, first. But we could go one by one. If that's
Gotcha. No,
helpful.
I hear you. I got you. The one that we're on, I think, goes without saying that, when you build a house, you have to get out of the ground, right? You got to deal with sewer, you got to deal with water, you got to deal with electric, you got to deal with basic foundation stuff. We just bought an island. We have to deal with similar types of things to create a pathway for the public to use the island safely in a sanitary fashion, et cetera, et cetera. So some of these seem like quote unquote no-brainers that need to happen. Water, stormwater, sewer, electric. I think, the question is obviously how far do they go into the property? I think based on what we're talking with early activation, we would say, they need to go to the root cellar at minimum.
Actually, on that, Bruce, I'm wondering if it goes beyond that on these. That I'm looking for some guidance. Actually, depending on the eventualities that this group comes up with this infrastructure, I'll call this the infrastructure, all the foundation for all those eventualities. I'm wondering, is that what this slide is intending here, as opposed to Bruce, what you just touched on, which is that first
Yeah,
phase, partial, kind
Mark,
of a partial deployment Bruce described.
I think, Mark, in general, and there'll be some nuance, I think, when we get to the sort of end of the conversation today, and also after the full outreach event on the 17th. But the goal would be to do all of this basic infrastructure work and sort of, I would say, circulation, vehicular and pedestrian circulation work as one base project so that the access requirements to enable the use of the island and the infrastructural investments are all one project because there's just enormous cost efficiency as well as sort of operational efficiency if we do that as much as possible as a sort of single mobilization. So if depending on I think where we get to with some of the other decisions, the hope would be that this is sort of the skeleton of the future kind of fully realized island.
Just to set,
Thank you, Becker.
Just so I'm clear, are we talking now about early access priority projects and base improvements, or just base improvements?
Just base improvements, Mike, thanks. I think that early access, because ideally that early access is essentially an enabling condition for the overall vision. Tonight, we really want to be focusing on the big picture future of Great Island, and that early access, which we've actually spent a lot of time on and will continue, that's effectively quite a small part of the larger future, and we want to keep it pretty big picture this evening.
if I understand it right, just to get the baseline set right on this infrastructure of utilities, essentially, am I correct in my assumption that the utilities come in from Long Neck Point Road down Great Island Road to the circle, and that we currently have quite a bit of electricity at the circle as far as conduit and as well as sewer and a water main that would sustain the infrastructure improvements that we're talking about, and that we would not need to dig up back to Long Neck Point Road or Rings End Road, but we're basically dealing with the circle inward, or further in.
There's a little bit of nuance about this, Bruce, but in general, I think one of the, again, to really simplify, much of the supporting infrastructure is in place. We have to build out from the circle. So there are a few exceptions to that, but for the most part, the way you kind of characterize that is correct, that a lot of the investment is really to the island itself to get it to work.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I think that helps just as far as we all are trying to envision what we're talking about.
And so, Becca, would there be any optionality here, or is this kind of an all or nothing? I mean, seems like pretty necessary to move forward.
I think what is such a good question. I think as we refine the answers to some of the other big question marks, there's some degree of optionality. And I think something that we're going to be trying to balance really closely with all of you is to make sure that we don't spend sort of all that's available in terms of funds for supporting Great Island on things that aren't visible, right? So there's like an enormous amount of pressure to make these improvements, but we're hoping to balance that with also experiences and investments that people will feel are meeting their needs. So I think basically this is must do, but there is some calibration about exactly where we draw the line on that. And I think there's more work to fully answer your question.
One more clarification. So the existing electrical conduit on the property, the existing sewer handling, the everything on the island is septic, right? The sewer doesn't come up to the greenhouse currently, right? Sewer stops at the circle.
So I'm just looking at the drawing. I think that's right.
That's true. Yes.
So the question we'd have to ask, this is well beyond me, but as you know, like how many toilet flushes can you have essentially based on the infrastructure that exists with a septic field for the area of the greenhouse? Like, is it a must go to do this right away if we're gonna activate the island at a low level? Obviously we have to think about that stuff, but I think what you're saying is, and what we're all saying is that if we ever want to renovate the main house and do weddings or something like that, if we ever want to have events like we talked about in the last meeting, you're going to need flushing bathrooms for 50, 100, 200 people at a time. And unless you're going to bring porta potties in, this type of improvement is necessary.
Well, but it doesn't have to be now. Like, why would we be improving bathrooms in an estate house, which we're not even sure that we're going to have a financial commitment from outside sources to keep? Like, my thought is, I with regard to the estate house, what is the bare minimum to keep that option open for development of it later? Like, there's asbestos abatement and other things that are related to the estate house, which, why would you do those things when we don't have a partner yet? So if we're talking about early or base improvements or something like that, I'm not comfortable with committing taxpayer dollars to the estate house until we know exactly where we're going to get money to do whatever the ultimate vision is of that structure.
Yeah, Mike, why don't we switch to the slide that's the base improvements for the structures? Because I think it's helpful to be, back one. Yeah, great. I think you're raising a really important point here. I think the infrastructure is definitely the kind of work that, for the most part, it's just much more efficient to do that work and get it in the ground once. There are places and ways where we can do what's called stubbing out, where you basically try to put a provision into the ground to be able to connect to in the future. And that can be a way of not making the full investment now, but basically not having to dig things up when you do know what you want to do in the future. I think as we switch into this part of the discussion about base improvements, about the envelope and structural stabilization, I think what you're raising, Mike, is really helpful thing for us to talk about for a few minutes, which is, I think the recommendation from Hildebrand is to go ahead with the structural stabilization for all the structures that have been deemed basically significant and sound, which is most of the structures on the island. And then I think there is some question about whether or not we should proceed with the hazardous abatement, which, particularly in the case of the estate house, we can anticipate likely being fairly costly now, or do we hold off on that hazardous abatement, which I think, Mike, you're suggesting we do, and only embark on that work for the estate house once there's a commitment to a future.
Right. Well, yes, with regard to the abatement, but I really feel like for each dollar of that we're talking about with regard to the estate house, I really need to understand the necessity of doing that, because as I said before, in my mind, I just don't see the rationality, again, of paying taxpayer dollars, significant taxpayer dollars, on preserving a future for a structure which we're not sure yet whether or not that's going to be. I feel like there are other things that we need to do, and I don't know the mechanics of making that decision or how we're going to go through each of these proposals. But I think for all of them, we really need to think about what these costs are. And I understand that they're not exact, but what these costs are, how they relate to preservation, and as opposed to keeping options open, because I don't want to back into projects in 2025 that are overly expensive when we don't have the partnerships or identified potential donors. So as a fundamental proposition, like what are we thinking our recommendations are for the immediate future of the of the island, and what's the bare minimum of taxpayer dollars that we need to spend here to do what we need to do to get people on this island and also to preserve options for the future.
So I think, Mike, that's actually what we're trying to do tonight, is to take a look at all of these structures. So we talked about the infrastructure, electric, sewer, invasives, all of that. But as far as the individual structures go, I think that's what Reed Hildebrand is trying to get from us, is which of these, if any, do we want to activate sooner? And if we don't want to activate them, then I think your question is, what do we need to do to keep them standing and available for the future? And I am of the belief that the main house, for instance, is really an important structure. And I think it is, I think it's I don't know, right is not the best word, but it's, I think, in the town's best interest for us to keep this structure standing and secure and safe from the outside, just from things falling and things like that. But I agree that this particular project is probably going to be the most expensive. And I'm not sure there's the appetite to work with that now when we have so many other ways to get people on. So this is, a big check we would write for just one project. So I guess, Becca, my question probably is piggybacking Mike's, and that is that when we look at these structures that we're not going to activate right away, what is the bare minimum we could do? For instance, I know there's an asbestos problem in this building, but do we need to address that if we put a padlock on the door? I don't think we do, but I'm not the expert. You guys are the experts. So Mike, does that kind of summarize where you're coming from?
Yes. If we're going to keep the option of the estate house open for a period of time, and I'm not sure, I might have an opposite view of its relevance and importance to the town, but I don't get to decide these things. But I certainly want to know what the annual cost is of keeping that structure open or available should we find someone in the future who wants to spend $40 million or whatever it would be to completely make it functional.
Hey, Mike, it's Palin here. Maybe, I certainly appreciate that the things that you're saying, I think they're all sort of spot on, but I think this is, when you think of what our charge is right here, our decision's kind of 3 or 4, maybe even 5-dimensional. We need to sort of understand what are the near-term things we need to build? What are some of the things that we may or may not want to preserve? And then what are the things that we want to build and or improve? What needs to be short-term, medium-term, or long-term? And I think we need to kind of go through all of these. And then we'll take, as we look at what all the different things are that can or may need to do, we need to then overlay on top of that in the next week or two as we begin to refine the cost of these. What are the costs? If there's a very efficient way to kind of plan for the long term by doing a little bit more today, I think that's great. Most people would say that's efficient to do. But if that's going to crowd out something that we're all excited about, we think the community is going to want near term, then we'll need to kind of think about those type of trade-offs. So I think as we kind of go through this whole presentation, we're going to see a lot of things that can or may need to get done or can or may need to get built. And then over the next week or two, we'll start to think about the costs. And I think it's all going to be one big trade-off of what do we want to do today versus plan for the future, and what are the different costs, and how do we want to sort of prioritize those costs in terms of planning for the future or getting residents on and enjoying today.
Yeah, it's
a little long-winded way of saying I think this is like we're going through the first of what is 3 or 4 different dimensions here.
Yeah, I think that what, Mike said is important to know, to hear, and that, I don't think that the town should be paying to immediately update the main house. I think we have to figure out governance and then potential capital campaign or something to hopefully find some private people that want to bring Great Island back to its splendor of yesteryear. And maybe that brings private donors in to help with that down the line somewhere. But I also hear, getting back down into the weeds of where we started, of this infrastructure project, and Becca said that, there's an economy of scale, and if basically we need to bring the utilities to the carriage house already, which is 75% of the way, if you continue up around the bend by the main house and to the pink house, that's the final 25%. It probably makes sense to do all that in one project. I think we should, find out the numbers both ways, but I totally agree. We only stub out, as Monica said, or we just basically, we're not hooking up to the main house. We're not plumbing or redoing the electric in the main house. Not at all. It would only be bringing it in the roads so that in a future state, it could be done without having to rip up the roads, etc.
I agree with that. To me, this is of the decisions we're going to have to come to. This part to me seems pretty obvious. Putting in place the infrastructure, for regardless of the various activations that we or the future may have. As far as which of the buildings to stabilize and which to perhaps activate, that's for us to start focusing on. But to me, putting the infrastructure in will save money in the long run, for sure.
Okay, so before we move on, I just want to give everybody, Jeff or Lori, I don't think I've heard from you. Do you have anything to say here before we move on?
I mean, I
let's
concur what everybody's saying. I just think, we have to be mindful of, when we bought these properties, we bought the land and we did buy the buildings, and it just would seem that we should do the bare minimum we do to prevent any further damage or deterioration of any building that we feel may have a future, because we did invest in those buildings as well. So just to make sure that they're tight from the elements and everything, I think is really important. I hate to see them get to the point where they deteriorate and we're like, oh, we could have done something with the building, but now we let it go too far.
Jeff?
Well, I guess if it is easy to do, we might want to look at the comparison of leaving the infrastructure to the estate house as a stub out for the time being. My guess is that in the grand scheme of things, that might not be that much, but I could be wrong. But as I understand it, Becca, these improvements for stabilization are really, a safety issue, and to avoid a 10x cost down the road if something caves in. And so, even though I too am kind of ambivalent about the state house as the linchpin, if for a reasonable risk reward that we are going to be able to find a use for it, it seems prudent to go ahead.
Dan?
A decision that will need to be made by the engineers, and I'm going to give an example that hasn't been engineered, which is if we keep the estate house, for instance, we may need a 20-inch sanitary line from the traffic circle. If we don't keep it, maybe we only need 12 inches. So the engineer who finally designs that infrastructure system's going to need to know whether they're designing for 40 toilets or for 20 toilets for a wedding venue or not. And so I think that those decisions have to be committed relatively early in order for us not to have to re-tear up the utilities in order to enlarge them because we decided to go small.
Wouldn't we just use the 20 because the cost difference between the two pieces of pipe, or small enough that it gives us optionality?
I think that's what Becca was saying, is that you go with what you might need in the future because that's less expensive than digging it up later.
The price is all in the digging, right? And the resurfacing?
Not entirely true, but
Okay.
Right, and Dan is correct, but generally speaking, for the most part, yes. And I think this is where I say there's just some nuance in all of this, right? So I think tonight we're looking for high level guidance from you, and there will be future decisions about exactly what Dan is suggesting, which is, do we actually go ahead and pay the whatever it is, let's say $25,000 premium to upsize the conduit that's going in to be able to handle, and I think we'll want to in the future set some guardrails on how those questions are answered. But I think I'll just say I think we really support thinking about this the way Lori framed it, which is that there was a very large commitment from the community in the island and its structures. And while we are not at a moment to have those partnerships or to have secured commitments so that we have total clarity and confidence in a investment strategy and future for the State House. I think we have enough sense that much of the community can envision a future where there really is something helpful and beautiful that happens in the State House. And so we don't want to make a decision in the plan now, this is Reed Hildebrand based on what we've heard, that would say there isn't a future there. And I think that, whether or not we plan for the really large scale bathrooms, it could be that we don't, that the town doesn't pay the difference and we put in a slightly more modest, we assume that there'll be bathrooms, but you don't pay for like a really enormous event possibility. And that if you have a partner that really feels that that's correct and the community wants that, they pay for that future improvement as the cost of their agreement to move ahead.
So Becca, I'm not sure how you want to proceed tonight, but since we're on the main house, would it be
Why don't we
helpful?
go to that project area? Because I do, in some ways, it's a very juicy area to discuss, and it does, I think, help frame some of these other decisions. Thanks. So why don't we
Great.
stay here for a moment and have a discussion.
Well, I'll start then. I think it's a beautiful building and it's a beautiful site. I think that we have a lot of structures that are probably a little bit more flexible and less expensive to work on right now. So while I would love to see the lawn used here, I think this, from my perspective, is more of a long-term project. And I'm not sure I would even go to low on this one. Or if I did, I would pick, working mostly on the outside. And that doesn't include terraces, things like that. I'm talking mostly about the grass, the property.
well,
Those are
sorry, Monica.
no,
This
go
gets to the issue of how long term is or short term or medium term is. So if we're asking Reed Hildebrand to design something, are we asking him for 5 years out or 7 or 10 years out? And so I would say in 10 years, I don't want this building to look like it is at the low or or even lower than the low, and just be sitting there unused. So I guess I wouldn't choose low for a time frame of 5 to 7 years. I think in that time frame we should have the first floor renovated, for instance. So again, time frame for all these decisions is very important.
I think, you know what, that's a great, you know what, Dan, that's a great question and a good reference point. And I think that we've, and on the town side, that we look at capital projects and we kind of look at a 5-6 year. We have a 6-year plan. So I think that it would be probably in this first phase helpful for us to look at the projects that we're discussing tonight with probably the 5-year time frame in mind. John, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I know we're not getting into numbers, but as I had flashed in my February RTM debt presentation, a number of $50 million for a phase one investment for Great Island, and that would be the appropriation we would ask for that would cover that phase, which would last 5 years. In other words, you wouldn't go back for another major appropriation until 5 years after that one. I mean, that's all to be discussed, but that was kind of the proposal that I'd laid out, and that was my thinking behind it. So if you think that that's the right thing, what it does beg, and it gets a little bit back to Mike's point, which is since we would ostensibly be having a budget for this first phase, you kind of want to ask, what could we do to maximize the impact of that budget for the visitor experience on Great Island? And so it would suggest that at a very high level, and you were kind of looking for high level guidance, Becca, it would suggest that at a high level, for those assets that we're not going to be featuring as part of an area where there's phase one improvement, we kind of want to mothball that asset for future use potentially at a minimum expense level. So, and that's not just true for this house, it's for all the other buildings on the property that would not really be part of our big phase one investment. I do agree, by the way, with, I think it was Bruce's point that whatever we do, we got to be really thoughtful about the infrastructure so that all future states are taken into account from low to medium to high, so that we don't undersize pipes and things like that.
Yeah, this is Bruce. I'd like to see the numbers of, eventually on this low, pretty much exactly as the bullets are shown. I think that is that's basically saying we're not renovating the inside of the house, but we are doing the terrace. We're pedestrian circulation across the front, which is like a coastal path, spaces for temporary outdoor events, and logistical support. Those are obviously what Dan just said and Mike just said, that stays away from the tens of millions of dollars. I'd like to see what that would cost. Those bullets there.
Yep, I would echo that. Frankly, I would even put a priority here.
Yep.
Many people have argued this is the most beautiful part of the island. Some people said that anyway. The circulation and activation of that lawn, which is two of the bullets here, to me are very, very interesting. Whether or not to start putting money into the terraces, I agree with you, Bruce. Got to see the numbers, but
yeah. I mean, essentially, we hired Reed Hildebrand to give us a master plan for 20 plus years and low, medium, high type things. Obviously, there's a fourth option of do nothing, which is not really shown in the low, medium, high. But I think that, I won't speak for all of you, but for what I've heard from a lot of people in town, is a lot of them are just looking for a place to come in and park, a place that they could get a glass, drink of water, a place that they can go to the bathroom, and some, smooth surfaces to be able to push a stroller, walk around, and some additional coastal trails that they can walk on to get better vistas. Those are the immediate demands that I'm hearing from my friends and neighbors. And I think that in the grand scheme of things, those are the cheapest things that we are looking at as from a deliverable cost. So, but that doesn't stop the job that we have here on the GIAC. We are tasked with trying to figure out what Great Island wants to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years. And that's what we're doing here. But I think we definitely need to keep our eye on the ball as far as early activation. And like, for instance, I think you've just hit it bingo on those bullets
So-
for the main house area.
So sticking
My-
with, let's get everybody's opinion. Dan, do you want to back up and were you thinking that you like the low and you would actually like to see the medium in this first 5 years? You asked that question and we never, I'm just trying to circle back and get your answer.
Well, I just want to remind everyone, if you've looked at the numbers that were sent recently by Reed Hildebrand, that the first two phases or activities, early access and the base improvements, adds up to $50 million. So there is no money to spend on anything else beyond those two items. Having said that, again, when we get to 5 years, that I hope we're able to do something, and that might be an outside investment or something else with the estate house if we decide to keep it. I think everything we decide to keep should be used. So low, I chose medium for this, in the 5 to 10 year time frame, but low is the minimum that we can do. Obviously, I don't even think we can do nothing, but we got to do something to it.
Right, and in that, I'm sorry, and in that $50 million, figure that relates to, projects and early access priority, I don't know that that accounts for just the general maintenance costs. Like if we did nothing, which obviously isn't going to be the case, but if we did, nothing, there's still a cost associated with the operation of that island on that annual basis. So when you see the $50 million figure, it's not accounting for the operational costs, which I think has to be also part of that $50 million figure. I think. I mean, I can
Mike, I don't think it covers the debt service either on the acquisition of the island.
Right, and I'm not talking about the debt, service. I mean, that's a separate entity, but these are projects totaling, estimated at $50 million, which is about what, John talked about. And nothing's written into hard stone, but when we consider the annual cost of the island, it should be over the next 5 years, it should be the projects that we consider, worthy and appropriate, together with all the other operational costs associated.
But I think, a lot of this stuff we're getting ahead of ourselves because we don't know the governance yet. We don't know, we haven't tested the waters yet to find out if there's an appetite by donors who may find this island appealing to them as far as investment. And, I think like before you make a big decision like renovating the main house, which is going to be a lot of money, then we need to know, is this thing a conservancy? Is it a 501c3? Is there is it a friendly and quote unquote investment or donation for somebody who wants to do that? And I think that probably that it doesn't make a ton of sense to spend a gazillion town taxpayer dollars on this if we can find people that where it's near and dear to their heart and they're willing to help out to create something great for the next 100 years.
Right. So you guys, I think for tonight, what we're trying to do is get a big picture, high level. So obviously the main house is a very expensive, and maybe we look at how we phase this, right? And this isn't in our first phase. This is in the, we do what we need to do to keep the building safe and secure and standing, etc. And we wait to see what develops as far as governance and other partners, etc. So we don't have to, and we probably cannot afford to touch every one of these buildings. So let's decide tonight, right now, actually, what do we want to do with this? What do we think we should do with this over the next 5 years? Is this where we want to allocate some resources, or do we want to do bare minimum, or do nothing, which I think, as Mike said, is not really an option.
Yeah. Monica, using sort of a little bit of the four corners that John talked about, you know, the general direction of overall spend. When I look at this property here, the sort of guidance that I would give Reed Hildebrand is, one, spend the minimal amount of money necessary on the four walls and everything inside of the house to maintain it and not deteriorate it much further. Two, improve stuff outside the four walls, like terraces, for example, only to the extent, like minimally, so people can use it, but we don't want to go materially if we don't know what we're doing with the whole house. And then the rest of the property around it, the grass, all of the surrounding area and so forth, we should make as wide open, available, and usable to the public as possible. That would be like my guidance towards them, to them.
Yeah, I agree with Jim on that. I mean, that's the location on the island. I mean, you think about it, it's so reminiscent of Newport and the Newport mansions, and I think that whole area is going to be a key draw for people wanting to go and to picnic and spend the day or an afternoon with their children, have, you know, small gatherings or whatever. I mean, you know, we keep talking it's an island and the coastal and the water view. That is the best water view on the island, and I think we should have it, as Jim said, it should be presentable and usable back there.
I agree with Lori and Jim with one tweak, and that is that the walkways or pathways or whatever these are be integrated into the broader flow for the pedestrians around the island. For the same reasons, people are going to want to walk by there, they're going to spend some time on the lawn. But I agree in general with what Lori and Jim just summarized with that addition.
I already said my piece earlier. I agree with the low here.
Okay, any other comments on this one?
Just that I agree with the low as well. I think you don't talk about anything further without partnership from a donor or otherwise.
Exactly.
And Monica and Becca, is this the type of feedback that you're looking at, looking for directionally on each of these big areas here?
Exactly. This is perfect. This is exactly what we're hoping. And we will, you know, receive it, process it, and then basically be sharing it with the whole community on the 17th. And so this is super, super helpful. And I think I'll just sort of reiterate it. We will show in a more like a cartoon thought bubble way that there's a future with a partner for this, but that future has to remain a story that will unfold, right? So I think part of what we'll be sharing is that the committee and Reed Hildebrand are committing to a future where that possibility stays open, but not to further investment of taxpayer dollars now.
So the medium and high don't go away.
They don't go away. They're sort of sitting there latent.
Right.
And they'll be in the full documentation about our process. But to the extent that there is a basically concise document that is the master plan, they'll be more in the appendix or in a sort of future phase chapter about a vision, you know, yet to be fully told, but still imaginable with some, you know, boundaries around it.
Yeah, I just hate to lose the body of work that you guys have created.
Yeah. Rebecca and Lori, I view this exercise as almost, we're trying to narrow the bookends around a lot of these different pieces here. We're not necessarily trying to fully sharpen the pencil. We're trying to narrow it for Reed Hildebrand to keep kind of redoing the project. And then as we get more materials and information on the costs, we'll narrow the bookends down further. And eventually I think we'll end up at a plan around 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different aspects of this overall plan.
So with that in mind, is there another area we want to focus on
Yeah, should we keep heading east for the moment?
Let's keep heading.
So we're looking at the beach, and we'll start with the low option here.
Becca, when you mention rehabilitate beach area, can you give us a little more information on that?
Yeah, thanks, Monica. I think I have shared maybe very succinctly that there's a set of um, conditions here that actually I think we advise are going to need somebody like a GZA, an expert in sort of coastal mitigation, um, to do a little bit of work on. I think the issue about that there are a bunch of conditions that are a little bit dangerous right now, and that we don't feel confident that we can recommend just removing, like the old structure that's mostly underwater that created the outdoor or the beach swimming pool. Um, so just in terms of what we're talking about here, I think we do see that there is some level of investment in that rehabilitation. It's not a fully defined level of rehabilitation. There's the amazing concrete abutment. I think there's a future where there's some guardrails put around that, so it could be used as a terrace. There's also a future where, as part of a rehabilitation, it just gets removed. And I think that kind of coastal dynamic consequences of, do we just remove these older structures or do we keep them and make them safe, has to remain. Like we literally need a little bit more investment in what the consequences of that. And that was beyond our study for this year. So this, when we say rehabilitate, it would be continuing to understand that.
I think that's a good point, because those two things, the activity that you've got penciled in there with kayak launch and stand-up paddleboard type stuff, to get over the clearance of that retaining wall, whatever you want to call it, that is mostly broken down right now.
Yeah.
Is a hazard, and clearly you can get over it at high tide, but sudden, you say, okay, a tide cycle is 6 hours, so you're at low tide or mid tide many hours of the day, and that means that it's impassable. So if you're trying to walk across the beach with your kayak or your paddleboard and get through the little pool of water, and then all of a sudden you're in 2 inches of water or something, and God forbid you happen to fall off your paddleboard at that moment, not know it's there, we've got a big safety issue. So
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Bruce. So I think what we're sort of saying is there's got to be a commitment to making this safe, basically.
yeah,
and then we heard really loudly from people that they do want the ability to have some level of kayak and paddleboard access here. And we heard from lots of the different coastal experts that this is the location, the safest, most desirable, most manageable location to site that. So there are a set of projects here that I think there's pretty strong endorsement for moving ahead with in a kind of low level. But there are some open questions that will need to be addressed as we solve exactly for how those things can work.
I hear what you're saying on that, and I know that there's been some feedback from some of the fire and police people on this, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of other experience in other harborways of Connecticut and elsewhere where they're fairly high trafficked, and let's just remember that we did say early on in this process that the eastern lobe of the island would be really, really earmarked as pristine. And so let's just remember that we do have the boathouse. There's a huge question mark on what it could be used for without massive investment. The boathouse does have a natural, or I guess it was man-made at one point, but a pre-existing ramp down to the waterway. it has, without having to tear it down or massively renovate it, you could put racks up in there with access out to Ziegler's Cove. I think it would warrant a revisit of a conversation with the fire, police, and coastal folks to say, I don't think we should just basically, after one meeting, decide that the kayak and paddle boards will now be launched from the old beach house location. I think we need to put a little bit more elbow grease into that.
Yeah, I'd like to look at this low without bullet one and the last bullet, because they seem to go together. What's the point of the squash court being converted from kayaks if we have a big unknown with regard to the rehab of the beach area? The rest of the bullets to me make sense for a low scenario. And that's not that we're throwing out the possibility of rehabbing the beach and using and activating this area, but maybe in a medium or a high, as you said earlier, Becca, not throwing it away, but keeping it as an option down the road.
And there's also logistical issues there of getting your kayak or your paddleboard there. Is it a scenario like the Darien Boat Club where you lease, storage spots down there, and then, but what if you're a day tripper and you just want to bring your paddleboard in here for the day, but our parking setup is that, well, we're really trying to keep, other than big events, we're trying to keep parking back by the boathouse and up, no further in than the stables. So now you're like, okay, a paddleboard usually, a kayak or a hard paddleboard usually travels on top of a car. So, I don't think we're going to ask them to carry it from the boathouse out to the beach house. So that now introduces cars out to the eastern lobe of the island. So I just think we've got a little bit of an elephant in the room here that we can't just necessarily move forward with on this plan without crossing more T's, dotting more I's.
Yeah, and I'm going to bring up again, the point is we really have to get the clear information about what's required under, Connecticut state health standards in terms of opening this up as a bathing area, and whether launching kayaks and paddle boards is considered bathing. I will tell you, when I use the paddle board, it's definitely bathing because I'm in the water more than I'm not. So, and then it introduces, are we going to, if it's open, do we feel we have to have lifeguards? So to me, this is it's a lower than low in terms of with the logistics that I think it was Bruce just brought up about, practically speaking, whatever, if we have to juggle, what are we going to do first? I think with the practical things about needing, hand washing stations or bathrooms or whatever down there, I think the degree of difficulty for the beach this size, is going to make this tricky when we think of all the different things we may want to do.
Wait a second. I was just wondering, and I think I understand your point about this beach being smaller than our other beaches, but to be sure, we run these two other beautiful beaches, so we have some historical knowledge on how to run a beach and how to have kayaking at beaches. So what makes this more complex than Pear Tree or Weed is because, well, those other areas have greater parking and there are already some bathrooms there, or what makes this so much more difficult?
I think that's it, Mike. It's as I understand them, and again, that's why whether we get this from our health department director, whatever, but my understanding of the Connecticut Health Department regulations for beaches is that to open an area as a public beach, that you need to have separate restroom facilities for males and females with running water, hand washing stations. And then that's just a baseline requirement. So we would need to know how we accommodate that. So it's my understanding that you can't open. That's why we have it, our two beaches, we do have, the bathrooms and the running water. So that's part of our infrastructure. So that, that's really the key piece of it is what can we even do it? And then the question I was posing that I don't know the answer to is if people are using it just to launch small crafts, would that be considered by the health department as a bathing area? I just don't know the answer, Mike, but I just think we need to understand that. And then again, if we know people are going in the water there, we would have to decide, as a, leadership group or the selectmen, then do you feel you need to staff it with lifeguards over the summer as we do with the other beaches? Now, we don't always have lifeguards. Obviously, the beaches are open the evenings and the lifeguards are gone. So, but we would just have to think about how we felt about that.
Mhm.
I'd propose that we just keep one bullet of preserve the beach house in the low and leave the eastern lobe untouched in the low. And then if we want these things, it should move up to the medium.
I think
You know,
some level of rehabilitation is a requirement, just to be clear, like we don't fully understand it, but I don't think it's a totally safe and sustainable condition right now
Yeah, I
for
agree. Like those stairs, like you think those
yeah.
stairs and things out, and like we got to remove the falling apart grills that are dangerous behind the beach. Yes, I agree. There is some remediation that needs to take place in the area, or rehabilitation. Good word.
Rebecca, were you thinking the seawall too, or we're
Our recommendation, which we'll put, is that it needs to be evaluated in a serious way, and that a determination should be made upon that evaluation. And we did not. And I think, Lori, we can follow up on the criteria that you've raised. I think that's really critical. And then I think there'll be this recommendation for evaluation, and then there'll be findings and a recommendation after that work is done. And I suspect that needs to be included in the low. So, because I would say that these structures fall a little bit under the kind of structural stability category that we have for the buildings. They don't have integrity structurally right now, and the consequences of further degradation aren't fully understood, and the consequences of full, upgrade to the previous condition are also not understood. And because it's in the water, it's a more complex set of evaluations and projects. So we'll have whatever happens there will happen very slowly. Also, just to be clear, like this is not work that will happen with any degree of rapidity, even from an assessment point of view.
I would be fine with eliminating the kayak and some of those items. I would like to preserve the lookout points at the key views, which I think equal those from the estate house, and in some ways are more dramatic.
Yeah, Becca, if I could, when I went down there a couple of weeks ago, I separated this into a bunch of different pieces because I think we're kind of treating the decision all as one. There's the low tide retention wall, right? That is basically 75% dilapidated, right? Something needs to be done with that. Either if it's going to be a swimming area, it needs to be taken down or built up. And if it's going to be a kayak launch area, it really just needs to be taken down, right? That was sort of to me, that was like the first decision you need to make. And then when you think about this as a swimming area, just based on the size of it right here, versus an area where you can do, let's just say, access the water for everything besides just swimming, because I don't know that you can have everything at the same time. It seems like given the length of the season, the day, the need for lifeguards, all of that, you could probably get more use out of it, given the size of it, as access to the water on kayaks, paddle boards, all that type of stuff, than you could on swimming. So I kind of lean towards this being more of a water sport access, just given where it is, access to Ziegler's Cove, Scott's Cove, all of that, right? And then when you walk backwards away from the water to the left, the stairs, in my view, they should be kind of repaired, fixed up, made safe, regardless of whether this is a swimming area or a paddle kayak area. And when you go to the right, the need or the ability to use those, small little areas right there to change, go to the bathroom, do whatever in, I think those could be useful regardless of whether it's swimming or kayak. I tend to lean towards kayak and paddleboard, but I think having something there, I think would be nice and really add to the value of that area. And I wouldn't want to tear something down knowing that we then couldn't replace it if we had totally taken it down. So until we decide what we want to do, I would rather keep those at least standing so that we didn't ruin the optionality about rebuilding those or improving those. That's what kind of where I sit on this area.
Okay.
And what Jeff said, I agree. I correct what I said earlier. I think that the coastal path should come through there in addition to, preserve the beach house and bring the coastal path through there. I think the coastal path essentially should almost be its own project area. I don't know. It's like we have segments of the coastal path in each one of these project areas. I think that, again, if there are no-brainers in anything we're doing here, coastal path is a no-brainer. The question is, what does a coastal path look like? Is it paved? Is it wooded? Is it just a path? We'll figure that out. But the presence of a path around the perimeter, the very coastal extreme of the property, I believe, is something that everybody wants.
Okay, you guys, it's 7:45, and we've done not even finished 2 areas. So, does anybody else that hasn't shared their thoughts on the beach area, do you have any thoughts that you want to share with Becca?
Just a question on the preserving the beach house. So what would it be? Just a decoration standing there? Would people be able to sit on the porch? I imagine they can't go inside. What happens?
I think actually even it's a great question, and given Monica's sort of time warning, I don't want to go down too much detail, but even having them sit on the porch right now, Dan, is hard to make feasible because it's completely not accessible or safe. It doesn't meet any code. So the code evaluation means that it basically has to be sort of a decorative backdrop that can be used for storage.
Thank you.
So Becca, I have an idea on that building. I was thinking that maybe we auction that building off, and other buildings have been, that's been done in Nantucket and the Vineyard. So if you give me a little bit of time, I think I asked Mike if he wanted to work with me on this. If we could pursue that instead of demoing it or just leaving it as a placeholder, I think it's an idea.
Well, Monica, if we were to eliminate a building from that area,
Mm-hmm.
then improve it, would we be able to go back later and actually rebuild it? Or once you take it down, given where it sits in the coastal area and so forth, would we then be prohibited from rebuilding something?
Correct. We'd be prohibited.
Yeah, so I would rather not completely eliminate all future ability to keep something down there.
I second that strongly.
I agree with that as well.
Okay. So you would like to have the building sit there, but we can't use it just so that it sits.
I think we need to examine that. I mean, prior to the town buying the estate, there were parties at that beach frequently where there were many people on that porch, many people in that building.
Right, Bruce.
But there's a staircase on both sides that has railings. There is a 4-foot railing on the front. So I'm not exactly sure what's not code there, but it could be made code with probably one of the more minimal investments of any building on the property. And to think that, anyway, in that we can't replace it if it goes away. This is something that has to be handled very carefully.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
but I think what Monica's talking about is, investigating to, discover if that's really an option. And certainly we should confirm, because it would be a factor if, we auction off that house and it goes away, we should conclusively determine whether or not we are closed out from that whole cove area from any other kind of structure. And that would be important, information to discover with certainty.
I mean, it's a pre-existing building in a setback. I don't think we're going to get a green light to build another building in that spot if we take it out. So I think it is a bit of a diamond in the rough, so to speak, right now. So I think we ought to be very cautious about thinking about removing it.
Okay. What's next, Becca?
Why don't we go to the carriage house, Monica?
Okay.
Who would like to speak first?
Hey, Kip, why don't you start?
Yeah, I think this is another one where I would start low. It seems like obviously important structure, and I think we can have events there with some low investment and kind of get a feel for how we want to use it, what kind of events are attracted to that particular building for programs, and then make some further decisions down the road after we see the response there.
How many people are going to be able to occupy that building in an event?
I think up to around 120 is pretty easy to accommodate. It's a larger space because it is a single space than most people understand. So it really has a high level of utility.
Well, the medium level adds bathrooms in it, and I'm not sure how you put 120 people in there for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and have them walk all the way up to the greenhouse in order to go to the bathroom.
I would invest money in this building first of all the buildings that we've got. I think it's central. I think you could use it in a multi-purpose fashion, like Reed Hildebrand has told us. I think you could have kids. I'm seeing things in my head like like when the Raptors guy comes and does the Hawks and flies the thing and it comes back into his hand, where there's kids there, there's Boy Scouts, there's all sorts of programming that could happen. And it's not as big of a project as the main house or the stables. I think that the greenhouse is probably more of a special purpose building. And I know that there's some talk of the playhouse, which we haven't gotten to yet, but I think that the playhouse would be maybe much lower on my list to do initially.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued by this because we really do have a dearth of, publicly available community space to, offer a variety of programming. And I know the Parks and Rec staff finds that now that there's a lot of demand for different types of things, and there just isn't. We just don't have a lot of places. So I just think the idea of a flexible community space that could be used in all sorts of ways, I think could be really, really helpful to the town.
Jeff?
Yeah, I agree. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. I think this would be a worthwhile one to dip into the median bucket if we can find some savings in the basic bucket.
Mike?
Yeah, I agree with Lori. Depending on the other projects and where we are with them, I could bump this to a medium. I think that the multi-purpose potential is really attractive.
Is it a medium or is it a high to do the building?
The building is an all of them renovation.
I think I saw the high was the deck off the back was the difference there.
I'm just not seeing. And
yeah, the low, medium, high isn't priority. I think it's what we would invest in it.
Yeah.
Right.
What the outcome could be.
Right.
I mean, you even think about us trying to schedule some of our town meetings, and somehow we're all scrambling for meeting rooms and how difficult that is.
I think the carriage house would be a great first sort of investment anchor investment to make. I actually almost view it, Lori, as a little bit of a smaller version of the estate house, but with one that has very good, I think one of the architects said good bones, right? Albeit that the roof and some other stuff needs to be improved, but it could be a much smaller, manageable sort of wow and exciting area for the town residents to use without having, the to create the same type of quality and usability in the state house. So I would definitely support this. And whether it's low, medium, or high investment, I think a lot of that seems to be how you finish it inside or either what you do around it. And you could even stage that. You could do the base renovation and improvement to the carriage house as part of like a low or a medium plan. And then down the road, kind of build out more stuff around it as we figure out how to use it.
Mark?
I think this is one of the structures that should be early activated. It's versatile. It seems like it's well positioned. So I thought that I think this one should be we should be using the low medium here. If the medium is the one that has the bathrooms, it has to have bathrooms in my mind.
Okay, you know what, and I'll finish up by I totally support this one. I think this building has a lot of flexibility. I think when we think about who's going to use the island, if it's seniors or if it's families or if it's just young people looking to go to an event, I just think that this particular building is so flexible and the location is perfect for another set of bathrooms. So I am very interested in at least the medium level.
Monica, if I could ask, the wetland restoration here, is this the invasives or is this something else?
So I think can you hear me? Sorry. Great question. Thanks. So that there is wetland here. I think one of the things that's very odd at the moment is that this is where I don't know for exactly how many years all the debris from the maintenance of the landscape on that island has been dumped. There's a reality that that practice can't continue as it becomes under town management. That's the kind of thing, if you don't even know it's a wetland and it's your own home and you're just mounding leaves there or whatever, it's fine. But now that this is a more highly regulated environment, the wetlands have to be treated sort of seriously, and it isn't it hasn't been cared for. So I think in terms of the future that I think we're talking about here, it would be to remove invasives, care for the wetland, change the sort of practices around that, and basically allow the vegetation to signal to people that it's a wetland and you want to be walking through it, and vehicles and tractors, mowers, things like that shouldn't be there. So there was a possibility of truly I don't know, like digging out the deep roots of Phragmites and things like that. And there may be some areas here where we need to kind of have a spot level of remediation. But I think the cost that we would recommend or the level of investment here is really just sort of basic care and vegetation to have the wetland operate the way a healthy wetland does.
Thank you.
Not increasing.
Yeah, thank you. I would be curious what the cost of that is relative to everything else on the slide.
Yeah.
Hey, Becca, you changed with your new numbers that the base project now includes bathrooms, which used to be the medium level of the carriage house. So now the base improvements has the bathrooms. Going to low only does the Phragmites, and the medium adds some grading around the area, and that's it. So I think everybody needs to understand that the picture, I don't think, agrees with the new numbers you sent.
That is correct, Dan. The numbers are draft numbers that we're circulating sort of provisionally. I think in terms of the conversation tonight, we're hoping to focus on what is in the slides. But I think the sort of preliminary direction from all of you has been that bathrooms should be part of the card. So we're trying to get ahead of understanding that as a cost, recognizing that trying to be, as mindful of the town's and taxpayer resources as possible is really important. So I think maybe, I don't know how much more, Monica, we need, because I know we're getting close to time. But I think the idea that the carriage house should have bathrooms, that this is a absolutely phenomenal facility for the future of the town seems really clear, and that sort of maybe the surrounding areas in terms of the landscape should be addressed so that they're cared for and that they work, but that level of investment should be kept a little bit more modest, is I think what we're understanding. And that as this becomes really instrumental, there are future projects here that can unfold.
I think that's a good assessment.
About any last comments for this area? And then I would actually be eager to talk a little bit about the stables in our, maybe before we go adjourn or whatever.
Yes.
I would start by saying I think this one is very different than the main house, because I think you can stage, as Reed has said in last meeting, you can activate this in stages. I think it's much harder to do. I mean, yeah, you can do that in the main house kind of by saying, okay, we're only going to open the first floor. But I think this building is been occupied and used as both the personal, private, and the commercial operation as recently as last year, and could be again with a lesser amount of work than other places.
Dan?
Dan, you're on mute.
Yeah, I know. I was sort of looking through the numbers through the spreadsheet. Again, some of the cafe is in the base improvements. And I think that if it were this picture here, I would choose a low for this. I know how important that Reed Hildebrand thinks that believes that the overlook path is, and I walk there and it is really beautiful. That should be cleared out. I don't know that we need a patio there or anything, but the pathways there and clearing that out, landscaping it, or whatever we need to do would be important, an important part of the stables project.
Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a very important area right here. I don't think a ton needs to be done initially, but I think things like making that forward court available for people to begin to relax on, thinking about the inside of that stable for whether it be a cafe or farmer's market or other things, and the area in the back. This seems like this could really be the larger anchor of the whole island. So I'd like to, to me, this feels like this should be part of the first stage of what we do here.
At
Laurie?
least for every day, right, Jim? I mean, because you've got the roadway coming in there. Yes, you can park near that. You can't. So it's not like you have to walk out to the main house lawn I think we're envisioning. You're not going to be able to drive out there anytime soon.
Yeah, this feels like a real anchor facility, and then
I agree.
And then the carriage house feels like our first kind of real facility that we're developing into something, right? But it's smaller.
Lori?
Oh, yeah, just a couple questions. One, are we assuming that the riding ring in the back, that's going away? Kind of under all scenarios?
That is what we're showing, Lori, partly, but it's a good question because keeping it as is doesn't have a lot of benefit or utility, and actually converting that at the very least to a sort of lawn area seems like it would have real benefit. I think that is a really exciting possible development footprint, which is a big question, I think, for the town. So preserving the ability to keep the footprint of the riding ring for development seems important. And I
Okay.
don't think we would want to demo it before we secured sort of a sense that that um, that footprint, works
Okay,
for,
and then just
for a
this
future.
really dumb question, but I'm not kind of BOH. I saw that somewhere else too.
It's back of house area, and
Okay.
I think what we're um, just when you have this, it's not probably going to surprise all of you, but most buildings need to have a back of house area, and it is our responsibility to sort of show how you can care for and maintain
Okay.
these.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
for like Ed and Tony, who we are very accountable to, we need to make sure that we're planning properly for that level of operation.
Okay, okay,
And
yeah. Yeah, I would agree with the low as a starting point on this. I think really assess, if is a cafe, I would want to see very, very modest investment or just make the space available and a cafe owner has to come in and bring their own equipment or something. To really see whether that works or not. Snack bars or cafes, they can be tricky, in terms of very uneven flow of business, et cetera. So I think we just want to be very careful there in terms of the town's investment.
Jeff?
Yeah, I would agree with the low and also with, I think Jim said that this lends itself, or Bruce forget, sorry, lends itself to phasing, I think, better than others because, we could make the small cafe a bigger cafe or do something else inside. But I think the real benefit is, as has been stated, it's a dramatic building. If that forecourt is improved, that's a money shot right there, and the view, if that's cleaned up. So yeah, I'm all in on the low on this, and having that and the carriage house be our maybe priority quick wins if we can fit it under a reasonable budget.
Thanks, Jeff. Kip?
Agree with the low. I am definitely sold on the cafe and the forecourt. Less sold, and maybe it's just the ideas that are shown as examples, but less sold on what the use would be for a full renovation as of now. So again, I think a wait and see in terms of what type of activities and events are attracted to this building is the right approach.
Mike?
Yeah, I agree. Low, maybe low plus in the sense that, as Jim said, I think I see it as a future anchor. So I think we should, keep our eye out to things that, need to be done and would be beneficial to have done early. I think that it does have a big, future on the island.
Mark?
I support the low. I think this building is a signature building and should be activated. I like the ideas of what we're proposing here. I would like to understand and explore whether or not taking down what they call the riding ring limits the ability to do something back there in the future. And I also ponder, does that ring in the short term offer a place if something like camps or indoor camps are held during the summer for kids, a place out of the weather when there's bad weather? It could be used for something like that. But generally, I like what's presented here. I like the trails, again, interconnecting with the pathway network throughout the island. To me, this should be a priority.
Okay, I agree with what everybody said. And I also think this is a building that phasing works really well. I think it lends itself to that. And I don't think, I think a building of this size, it's better if it's utilized rather than sits empty. And it's one of our most ready to go. So I definitely support the low.
I think the top priority should be to fix the clock though, so it works.
It does work twice a day.
Yeah,
Sorry, too easy.
that
All
was
right,
good.
all right. What do you
On my
have?
list. That's on my list. The clock.
What do you have, Becca? Next.
Oh my God, you really cracked up there's so much laughter in my studio right now. Let's go, if we could quickly, probably to the Playhouse.
Mark?
I struggle with this one. It's a wonderful building. Definitely should be preserved. This low isn't really much activation. I have no disputes with that. I definitely want to make sure we maintain and preserve this facility for some sort of use down the road. I know, well, we've all heard some of the ideas that have been bandied about, but doesn't say here how we're activating the building itself in any way. But,
Well, this is low. Do you want to flip to medium? Yeah.
Yeah. I remember this. Not knowing, I'd like to explore potential uses. I know some of the ideas that were tossed out. I just don't know if there'd be interest. But even this involves maintaining the ability to utilize this structure down the road. It doesn't necessarily spell out ideas. I see events. I remember one of the ideas was for a not-for-profit type place. I kind of lean towards medium on this. I don't see these items as being all that, from what I recall on the cost side, all that meaningful. I definitely want to keep this in it's ready to go. This, if I recall, this building's ready to go. It was occupied a year ago. I wasn't really enamored with the high and some of the ideas there. I liked them. Wouldn't want to rule them out as a possibility, but more or less maintain that building so that it's ready to go for some near-term use. Doesn't seem like a big lift under the low or the medium. And that's where I was kind of coming out on it.
Okay. Mike?
I'm in the low area on this. There might be a future, for this. I understand that the cost estimates were relatively low, but I think we're thinking about big things with the, carriage, house, and I have the stables a little bit in front of this, so we have this in the sort of the low preserve zone.
Okay. Kip?
I'm low as well here. I think enough has been said. I don't want to
Got it.
go on.
Jeff?
Yes, I'm low as well. The only question I would be is if we would wish to put the patio in at some point in the future. There's nothing by just keeping it low now that would preempt us from doing that. So if that's the case, I'd vote low as well.
Okay, Laurie?
I agree.
Good.
Just preserve it, make sure that it's protected and that we can use it in the future.
Jim?
Jim indicated he might have to jump away for a work thing, so if you don't hear from him immediately.
Okay.
I'd say I'll jump in. I'd say low as well. I think removing that garage is key. The parking court is also going to be key since there's so little parking. If we do any kind of events in that area on the back lawn of the main house or anything like that, having some parking in the proximity of the main house there, I would expand that parking area. It's not visible. It's kind of low. It's down low. It's not visible from Ziegler's Cove. It's not really visible from the walking paths. It's pretty wooded there. It's hidden. If you don't even look, if you don't know to look right when you walk past it, you almost miss it from the road. So I would increase the parking there a little bit more to the, with, you know, without making it a monstrosity, but let's get some parking there and put the building on ice.
Dan?
I see again that in the base improvements, we spend $1.7 million to bring it up to rental condition. And if we're going to be renting it out right away because it's and bringing people into it, that we should put some money into landscaping the area as well and making it an attractive rental facility, not just a building that is restored inside. So there needs to be some outside work done as well.
Okay, my thoughts on this one is it's not in a it's in a beautiful spot, but it's not in a highly visible. And if it comes down to priorities, this wouldn't be one of my top priorities. I would do as little here as possible at this initial stage. Okay, back to the next one.
Yeah, let us move to the boathouse.
Okay, sorry, folks, but I am moving us along because we're an hour and 40 minutes into this and we have other things on the agenda. So, Bruce, what do you think for the boathouse?
I said most of my piece last week. I think we keep it low. I think it needs to be revisited as to whether the purpose of the boathouse should be a boat launch for kayaks and paddle boarders. Obviously, we need to make sure that it's safe and similar to other places where that stuff happens. But I would go with low. I would, very similar to the Playhouse. I would basically put that thing on ice unless we decide to activate it for kayaks and paddle boards.
Okay, so just so everybody is clear, there is something lower than low, right? Low, medium, and high all have a level of activation included. So if we're just going to put a lock on the door and mothball it, for lack of a better, that's an option. Okay, so if that's what you want to do, if that's what you think we should be looking at this point in time, then that's what you should say is, let's just say,
Nothing.
what's that?
Do nothing.
Do not yeah, basic, let's call it basic, which is
I mean, there's already a cove terrace there. There's a park, there's asphalt that you could put chairs and benches on to look out over Ziegler's Cove. So the do nothing there mothballs the building, keeps it, you know, obviously what we've all said, preventative maintenance. We make sure the roof is good. We make
Okay,
sure
got
that
it.
pipes
Got
are
it.
drained so they don't burst in the winter.
Okay, so let's call it basic if it's just maintenance and making sure the building is safe and all that. Okay, so there's low, medium, high, and basic. Okay, so Bruce, you gave us your thoughts. Dan?
Yeah, same, basic for me.
Basic. Okay, Jim, are you here? No. Lori?
That's fine.
Basic?
Yep.
Jeff?
Well, I don't want to get into big distinction of the benefits of the terrace versus what's existing. So I'll go low.
Go. Okay, so you would like the terrace there. Okay, that's great. Kip?
Yeah, I think low with the caveat, you know, if we get an investment partner where it makes sense to do it with a restaurant, I think that's something to consider. But without a partner there, definitely low.
You'd like to do something there. Okay, Mike?
Basic.
Basic. Mark?
I go with basic. I'd like to maintain the possibility that it gets activated if there's a party that's interested, but basic and keep it attractive.
Okay. Yeah, this one, Becca, I'm going to be basic. Okay, next.
Go to the greenhouse, if that's all right.
Sure. Okay, Mark?
Are we, greenhouse.
Yeah, can you say what page you jumped to? Sorry, just so we can follow along.
Yeah, let me flip there.
I actually don't have page numbers on my screen that I'm showing,
Okay,
so I
no worries.
apologize,
I got
but
it.
it's on the earlier side of this presentation, if that's helpful.
Give me a minute. I'm trying to get to where is it?
Okay, Mark, while he's doing that, Mike, are you ready?
I would say low.
Okay. Kip?
If you could come back to me, I'm just going through the pages real quick to remind myself.
I'm sorry, Jeff?
Low.
Low, okay. Lori?
I think for now, low in terms of just again, because we're going to be prioritizing.
Yep. Jim? Nope. Dan?
Yeah, I would, I made the comment, this is our first impression area, so I would do some work around it. Again, this is where all the parking is, this is where the people enter, this is the first space they see. I think there needs to be some improvement to the area. The restored meadow for certain. I'm not sure that we need a community garden there, but the arrival terrace, some improvement.
Okay, Becca, can you go back to low?
Yeah.
Okay, so some of this work is included in kind of what we were looking at as far as just base, the early access. So the restrooms, a little bit of work around the restrooms, obviously the road work, the parking. So Becca, what in this low is not already anticipated in the base project?
So I think
Terraces.
the terraces that is a important part of it. I think also the level of the meadow, and really having that space be a beautiful, thriving environment. I think the reality is that after the base, it's not going to look that much like the early activation parking project. It's not going to look that much different from how it is now, and it does look pretty. I don't know, not super cared for. So I think Dan's point that this is the sort of first impression, and if we're not going to make improvements to the boathouse, I do think really taking seriously somewhere between a version of a low or a medium here is probably important.
Okay.
Yep, Monica, I could jump back in and build on what Dan said. I think first impression, and not only that, but if you look at between the low, medium, and high, the medium and high seem like, there's the adventure play in the community garden. It doesn't seem like huge investments beyond the low, and I think it's the first time we've come across something that's related to kids, and maybe it's because I have younger kids, but I think we should be thinking about all age groups, and that's a pretty big win for that age group, I think, and just kind of fits into, again, first part of the island, first impression, and I do think we'd have the most interest for activation here, like the community gardens, like a farmer's market. So just want to make that point.
Right. You know what, when I was thinking about this whole project, I was looking at it through, okay, who lives in town and how do we touch each one of those entities? And I think you're right, Kip, here, the playground for the kids, I think for seniors, a really comfortable bathroom and easy parking. And I totally agree with first impressions. So I think I'm not sold on the community garden. I know it'll be raised beds, but I have my other worries in that area. So, but I would definitely go above and beyond what the base is on this one. Did I miss anybody? Mark, did I hit you?
Yeah, I wasn't ready because I was looking for the medium and high, because I do think this touches diverse groups in town.
Mm-hmm.
The agricultural history here of the island, I think resonates right here in this building, frankly.
Mhm.
And so I lean towards medium, some of the activation related to assuming community gardens can go there. I love the idea of looking for the one that had to restore the glass house, but
Mhm.
the terraces. I do think this is a high visibility spot, and so putting a little bit of investment into not only to the activation but to the parking and the landscaping or the visual. So I don't know if that's a medium, but I lean towards uh, activating this a bit more because it serves so many constituencies potentially.
Okay.
Yeah, actually listening to everybody, Monica, I would concur with that.
Okay.
And I would go medium as well. I would say I think that but again, I think we got to keep our powder dry. We can't do everything. I think that there's people and organizations in town that would be very interested in helping us reglaze these greenhouses and bring them back to their former glory. So it's very similar to my feelings about the estate house. I think, yes, we want to preserve it and do something with it, but I think that we should probably keep it off of not a high priority for our dollar spend, but if we can find dollars that somebody in this community wants to help improve this, I think that that's the direction we should seek for it.
Okay, Becca. Did we do all of the buildings?
I think the only area maybe to look at now is the bridal area.
Okay. Did we do the polo field?
We didn't actually.
Okay.
Why don't we pause here?
Okay. So as everybody knows, Tony's done what he can out there. The grass, this area needs some work just to get the lawn in better shape.
I'm sorry. I just heard my name. For the one moment I stepped away.
Okay, who's this?
Tony.
Tony.
Oh, Tony. Hey, Tony. No, that's okay. I was just talking about how you're working on the polo field. So, okay, Mark, any thoughts here?
I go for low here
Okay.
to get it in more usable condition. Doesn't rule out the possibility of those eventualities in medium and high.
Becca, can you show us medium and high really quick?
Sure.
Okay.
So I think that, right, so you get the provisions for being able to have a food truck in the medium
Yep.
and a walking surface basically going all the way around. For the high, the ability to actually have sort of large scale events and performances. And I think some of the things that were identified as a kind of community benefit in the initial set of ideas, all exterior, but sort of more the Tanglewood kind of ability to be able to host larger events would be supported by the high.
And then what's the low?
The low is basically just fixing up the lawn because it really isn't in good condition. It's wet so much of the time right now. And additionally, there is this opening in the historic wall because one of the challenges right now is how if we have the pedestrian flow in that what is currently the walking loop, it really feels like there's a desire line between the lawn and that walk. And there's also some, I would say, public safety benefits to creating this opening that we talked about with the fire marshal.
Okay, so that's with all of them. Okay, Mike?
Yeah, for here, I would go medium. I think it's important to be able to have a little bit more activation, perhaps some food trucks sooner than later.
Kip?
I'm low. I agree with what Mike just said, but I'm not sold on this walking circuit. I tend to think about the town inventory points that we always bring up, and I think that's kind of repetitive to what we have at Highland. I don't know that the island needs that walking circuit there.
Okay. Jeff?
I'll go low.
Okay. Lori?
Can we flip back to medium? Because that's, I think that's, oh, no, that's not it. Yeah. I may be somewhere between low and medium because I do like the medium has, from the upper road, it has stairways down so that you can kind of get down from that side and access the field where now you can't. So I think that aspect of the medium is good and would really improve the flow. You know, the walking circuit, I mean, I will say that, you know, we go back to the Parks Master Plan, that was one of the most requested amenities. People do like those, but I realize that they can be quite expensive, so might not be a priority now. So I'm probably somewhere between the low and the medium.
Jim?
Yeah, so I'm basically between the low and the medium. I think the property is great, and you know, a little bit of crabgrass I don't think ruins it at all. I think from the on the medium perspective, you know, I mean, you Lori, I hear your point about the walking circuit. I mean, when I look at this island, there's miles and miles and miles of walking circuits already around it. So to create another kind of specific one feels like that just actually might just take away from our ability to use that and things like the food truck loop. I mean, you know, again, we could start out by having a food truck in one of these areas without actually building a physical loop down there just to see if it works. And, you know, I think, again, that's one of the things I'd mentioned earlier that I think things like food truck, we should be trying already this summer in anticipation of maybe doing something more permanent down the road. But I'm low or low medium.
Dan?
I think that if we're going to have a community gathering place, that we should make this a good community gathering place. And so on specific items like the walking circuit itself, maybe we don't need, but stairs to the lawn is a good idea. So pieces of it should go in. None of the numbers are big numbers compared to the other projects here between low and high. So it's not the biggest investment we have on the island. But I'm for making it an attractive community gathering place.
Bruce?
Very similar to Dan. I'd say low. I don't really want the family pavilion immediately. You know, I'd say low, either basic or low.
Okay. You know, I agree with Kip. I think that the walking circuit, I think when you look at what Reed has put on this property, like Jim said, there's miles and miles of walking paths. So I don't know if we need a loop right here. So, but I hear Lori's points about the stairs. So, but I would be low to yeah, I'd be low. Okay.
Hey, Monica, if I can, because I didn't explain why I was on low.
Okay.
But I've talked about walking paths on every other site. I didn't see the walking circuit as consistent with the trails that I've been advocating for in all the other areas. So that was my primary reason for going low. Is not really seeing the need for a walking circuit, another walking circuit.
Got it.
I'm indifferent on food truck hookups.
I'm going to advocate for a low, medium, hybrid solution just on this exact subject. I think the idea that there's a way to be able to come down from the stables and from the greenhouse on a paved surface is important here. And just thinking about what we've heard. So I think the idea that you know, that we have something where there's probably a path that just hugs this slope and then gives you these stairs like you were suggesting, Lori, that seems to me that allows the kind of trail circuit that you're describing, Mark, but it's not overly paving, but it allows the sort of, I think we have a no dead end kind of logic that we're trying to create here. And I think the idea for families that they could park and there's a little bit of a stroll and it's not too much, where you could go from the stables and walk down here and not be walking through the grass. Seems really nice and is aligned with what everyone is saying is relatively low investment. So I think we could show that in the low, basically.
And Becca, for ADA compliance too, if we see this as an activation area set for large community gatherings, don't we need to have some level of?
Yes.
I think it's got to be a firm, stable surface.
Yes.
So it's accessible for all abilities.
Exactly. Yep.
Which grass isn't.
Correct.
Okay.
So let's move to the the lookout. Yeah, thanks.
Bridal.
Actually, we should just, I think we didn't, well, I guess we did. I think it's the Scott. I wonder if we talk a little bit about the idea of the play area here and we didn't fully discuss that before.
Sure.
I mean, I think it would be great to have something like that. I feel like that's something we could probably fundraise for. But I guess that would take, would have to fund demolishing the house first. But I think some activity centers for children would be, as Kip said, you got to think of all ages. And, kids like to walk around to a certain amount, but, they like to be able to get on play equipment and such.
Mark, any thoughts?
Yeah, I certainly support bringing down the building. I agree with Lori. I think it was Lori that's speaking. It seems like an opportunity for the community to get together and for a play area of some sort. So I err on low with, don't want to abandon the medium, but would like this to be another area that gets attention if there's interest from the community in a group, friends of, or a playground type thing.
Okay. Mike?
Low as well.
Kip?
Yeah, I had brought up the adventure play area on the greenhouse. So I guess, Becca, I'm wondering from you what you see as the better solution there. Do we need both? What would you recommend there?
I think that's a great question. There is something really, I think, pretty spectacular about having that here. This is because this can be truly isolated. So I think we think that the area by the greenhouse makes a lovely complex of activities, but it's really multi-age. It's very convenient to the parking. I think as a special, more destination family location, this is a differentiated space. And I think the relationship to the carriage house is really wonderful. And the fact that you're closer to an at-grade condition, like with a polo field and that large, lawn area, is also really lovely about this as a possible future. And I guess this might be given sort of the tone of the questions. I feel like this is something where we can show in the plan this medium option. It doesn't mean that it will make the cut for phase one, right? If this feels like something that's really a desirable future for the community, we can show it, and we can even have a recommendation that some level of partnership, investment, and community support is basically a requirement for this future to unfold.
Okay. Yeah, I think with that, I might go. I don't know if I was at medium or high on the greenhouse, but I'd probably go down one there and stay medium here.
Jeff?
Yes, I'll go medium with the funding qualification in there as well.
Jim?
I would be low here because I'd want to think more about what we can do long term with that area. given it's somewhat adjacent to the stables and kind of backs up to the east part of the island there. So I'd stick low on this.
Dan?
Yeah, I'm a solid medium on this.
Okay, Bruce?
Okay, sorry about that. I switched devices. I am a low to basic on this. I'd say tear the house down. I say that sadly, as my good friend lived in it. But anyway, I think it makes sense. And then I think, whoever said it, we need to find a partner to build out the other things. I think they have great merit, but I think that we got to we only have a certain amount of dollars to spend.
But would you support this as being a playground or, adventure play area if that's something that we could raise community fundraise for?
Yeah, I think that there, we need to look at it carefully. I think that there's a lot of those places already in town, and there's not a lot of great islands in town. So I think we got to, just make sure that we are very thoughtful about what we build there. And but if we do decide to build something there, it's in the right place because it's close to parking areas that we're talking about. And if people are walking with their young children, they're really not going to want to walk out to the beach house area or to even the estate house. It's pretty far. So like was said earlier, it's near the polo field. It's near the carriage house. It's near things that are being activated for children.
Okay, I'll wrap it up. I would support, I really think that we need to have something for children on the island and a nature playground that really is nature oriented. I think would be really, really nice. And, when people come with their kids, if they have something that they can do with them, I think would be great. So if it's something where we look for funding from the community on an individual basis, that's great. But I would support the town partnering on this one because I think a playground's important.
Monica, I agree with that there should be a playground, places for kids. Where it's best suited, I really would like to maybe think a little bit more about whether here, this is a great spot, no doubt. We talked about it at the greenhouse. I wasn't really drawing this distinction between the two, but
what is the distinction?
No, that's
yeah.
what the distinction is. This one looks like it's a prettier spot for sure.
Yeah, Becca.
Yeah, that I think the distinction is that there's a sort of argument of a little bit of convenience, and I don't know. I think many people have either remember being a child or have been with children or had their own children recently enough that it's all very within memory. That when you're parking and you're trying to do things and you're meeting friends, having a little bit of play ability close to that sort of everything happening zone is incredibly helpful, which is the idea with the greenhouse, that it's sort of there's something for everyone there. This is much more a kind of destination, right? Like you would make a plan to spend Saturday afternoon here with, your friends or friend group. So that's the big distinction, which is like this is really focused on an extraordinary experience for families versus a little bit of an amenity for people to gather over by the greenhouse.
So Becca, would you suggest that we contemplate both, or is this?
I think so to the extent that there is a lot more work to be done from now and what actually gets implemented and actually gets funded, immediately. I think the big task for Hildebrand and for the committee is to make a plan that's aligned with the best interests of the community. And I think having a place for a little bit of shelter, a little bit of all ages, where everybody arrives, which is sort of what we're showing by the greenhouse, uh, and then having a specific location that I think really can be fundraised for, that is for children. Those are two distinct things, and I think both are really aligned with what we've heard from the community and is in the best interest of the community. And neither are actually huge lifts from a cost point of view, too. This is like, these are not really, really expensive projects, either of them.
Okay, but if we were going to phase, we would start with over by the parking and the bathroom.
Most likely if for a first project, because I think you get all age benefit, but I think that this should come into the plan, and I think there is a sort of basic or low level improvement that is very low cost here that has enormous benefit for the community.
Okay.
Becca,
So,
something like this. My question to you would be, given that this is so easy, low cost, and can be replicated in so many different places in the island, is this something we do sort of at the end after we figured out the big pieces of the puzzle, or and not build around this?
That's a great question, Jim. I think the idea that there is a beautiful lawn area here with some paths and a little bit of a play area feels really important to do kind of as we're making basic improvements. I think it seems possible to wait on the nature playground itself. My sense is that the location here with the relationship to the stables and the carriage house is the best location on the island for this program. And it can be discreet, so it doesn't sort of impact views. But I actually think this really is the best location for that.
And how do you think about that compared to like the lawn behind the great mansion? Like, I mean, I would imagine like that's the number one spot where everybody wants to gather, like in terms of having something over back where the old, I think it was the tennis courts used to sit.
Yeah, I think we see that as so valuable for what I'm just going to call maybe more grown up or all ages activity, and sort of part of the Great Lawn and Estate House area, that to think about really having a children focused area there doesn't seem the best value for that area.
Okay, Becky, you want to move on to?
Sure, bridal.
Yeah. Okay, we'll start with Mark.
Second here, lookouts. I liked the medium because it included, they both have the lookouts. The partial boardwalk. I hesitate in not knowing what that looks like. I know we talked about it a lot. We don't have time to go down that path here, but I lean towards low to medium. I like the idea of having the walk, the boardwalk. If we can get over what a boardwalk is and how it looks, and that it's not intrusive.
Kip?
I think I'm a low here. I think there's still the variable of the eagle's nest, and how this really plays into the loop. So I think for the time being, I'm a low. I think we let people enjoy the nature as is. And then maybe longer term, we think about that boardwalk.
Mike?
I'm low as well.
Okay, Jeff?
Well, I liked Kip's thought of holding open the possibility of the deck and the boardwalk as a future project, but starting with low.
And not including the boardwalk.
Well, again, I don't have the cost up in front of me. I think for the time being, maybe just keeping it low.
Okay, Lori?
I mean, ultimately, I like the medium, but again, in terms of priorities over the next few years, it's probably, the low to baseline. Again, to me, I guess mentally, I'm making a little distinction between, true end state as opposed to what we can do with, the first, a first allocation of money that gets us through, say, 5 years, as we've been talking about. Because there is the loop there now, it's usable for people, but to enhance it down the road, that would be something great to do, but I don't see that would be an immediate priority, given that it's, usable now, during the appropriate time periods.
Sorry.
I can go, Monica. It's Bruce. I would say I would be at do nothing or basic, with the exception of the coastal trail. I call it the coastal trail, not the boardwalk, because I think I expressed my feelings last meeting that I don't support improving the trail around the eastern lobe there, with any improved structures like wooden raised or concrete. And so I would call it basically leave it the way it is and create a path, a trail around there, literally like rake it or something, or something similar to what's been done around the high school. Very minimal.
Dan?
Yeah, I like the two lookouts that showed up in the beach slide, which are in the bottom of the of this this slide. But beyond that, I'm low, and I would just like to see the coastal trail be a literal trail around the rest of the that lobe. So low.
Okay. Who did I miss? Mark?
I went, Monica, already, but I did comment about the boardwalk. The slide I'm looking at didn't have the depiction that's on the screen right now. Anything along the lines of that boardwalk, I would be a hard no. I'd be more towards minimal. I like the idea of that coastal path. Like what someone described as around high school. So I was low to begin with, but I did touch on the boardwalk. But I really am thinking coastal path with elevation if you got to go get over a ravine or something.
Okay, I think I hit everybody.
Yeah, I didn't go on this, but I would just tell you I'm definitely a low on this. I certainly don't want to be spending like something like the picture up there, large amounts of money through the bridle track, given it's closed half the year. I like the idea of more, focused on, the cross country path around the high school that Mark mentioned, in terms of giving people access to around the coast. Maybe a hybrid of that, but
yeah, I think that this, the 1.5-mile coastline for this island is something that is really unique, and it's not something that our residents have exposure to, most of them. So I think it's really, I want to do whatever we can do so that people can enjoy this. And I'm not sure what a coastal walk or a boardwalk or whatever, or the over on Diller, that kind of model. I just think something around the perimeter of the island where people can take a long leisurely walk and actually see the coastline would be terrific. So I don't know, Becca, if that helps you.
It does. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, I think we got everybody there. So I think we have all of the spaces, right, Becca?
Yes, this was incredibly helpful, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, Becca, what else do you want to cover on your end?
I don't think I need to cover anything else.
Okay, we do need to go over the dog thing, because that is something that we need to address. Just to bring everybody back to the dog discussion. So when we recommended to the Board of Selectmen, we included that there should be an ordinance for fines, and thank you, RTM. They made that happen. And we also said that dogs are not permitted on the bridle path or any other areas with signs indicating dogs are prohibited. This was to address sensitive areas on the island. And Becca, you touched on this last meeting. We need to conclude this by June 1st when we open up the area. So you want to take it from there? What are you thinking?
Should we show the slides from
last presentation? Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the same as last meeting, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, this is we developed this drawing looking at the various policies that are in effect in the town, and sort of addressing the sort of basic futures about where people are going to be gathering, where there are going to be tall grasses with a lot of ticks, so potentially not really healthy situations for dogs, and where we are anticipating having large lawn areas. So this is I would say, a much more tuned plan that does basically apply all typical ordinances in the town to the sort of basic future of Great Island. And it just has a lot more detail than anything we've looked at together before.
Okay, so in this one, dark green is no dogs, and medium green is dogs anywhere, and then the light green is dogs on the paths. Is that right?
Yep, and I think the goal, right, is that they're on leashes, but we're applying the standard rules on beaches and coastal areas from the town. So that is the dark green area. I think it would be hard for us to not apply that to the island, just because it's basically what's agreed on everywhere else in the town. And then there are also basic sort of practices around where people eat. And so we've looked at that as well. And so that's how we arrived at this particular plan.
I don't think there's enough signs in the world to mark this where people can go with dogs and they can't.
Yeah, that's well said. I agree with you, Dan. And I also think this totally flies in the face of what we voted on when we said we wanted to allow people with their dogs on leashes to go where people are allowed to go. It looks like basically the way that you guys are drawing this, and I say you guys because I don't know who had anything to do with this on the committee. I saw it last time very briefly in the last meeting. Today's the first time I'm really, it's been on the agenda, so we're talking about it. But am I seeing this right, that you're saying dogs can go on the polo field and the backyard of the main house? Other than that, it's the same as it's been since dogs have been allowed on the roads?
Yeah, but there are a lot more paths, Bruce, right? So I think a lot of these areas are going to be vegetated with tall grasses and plants.
Those paths are not there June 1st.
Hey, Bruce, I would chime in with you. I got to leave in a few minutes here, but I'm a hard no on making any changes to the rules that we discussed extensively over many meetings and the Board of Selectmen passed on March 10th. As it relates to if there are ticks, and you're telling me we should be closing down to dogs, and that should be closed down to humans as well. So I don't actually think that's the problem. And then some of these other areas about where we're eating or not eating, I mean, we haven't even decided on the master plan or kind of what any is. So I think making any changes from right now would be sort of silly, given we just voted on this like 45 days ago.
Well, Bruce, I'm sorry, Jim, we did vote to look at sensitive areas. That's why we're doing this. So,
and there was one area that the group unanimously agreed to put forward in connection with those recommendations that we all made to the Board of Selectmen. That was the bridle path. And I don't know that we have any more information today on May 7th than we did when the Board of Selectmen passed this on March 10th.
Right. You know,
Well, so we were asked, just to be clear, we were asked to look at the standard policies in the different open spaces in the town and to conform those policies with the basic master plan.
can you
And
tell
that
me
is
what
what
those,
this is.
can you tell me what those policies are? Because I don't know any park or any area of the town where it's multi-shaded like this. I think this is confusing. I think this is an opposite, as Jim said, to what we talked about before. At this point, I am also a hard no. We haven't even tried the the changes that go in effect, June 1st. I mean, I know we're not voting on anything tonight because that's not on the agenda, but if it's 5 miles to make the case to make a change like this, I haven't seen 5 feet.
Yeah. Becca, who asked that this be reevaluated? You said you were asked?
Sorry, we knowing that the timeline is out, that was in one of the meetings that we've had, there's a conversation about, given the future that we're looking at and given the other practices around where people eat, where there are potentially small children, where there are lawn areas, where there are beach areas, could we look at what it would be if we applied those typical rules around dogs to Great Island? And that's what we've done. So we can provide the backup for that to all of you.
Yeah, Jim, that
that would be helpful to see the background in terms of, it sounds like you tried to make this conform with what we do in other parks.
Yeah, and the beaches, exactly. So it's not, and this is not, we're not trying to do something, we don't, I think everyone is in agreement. It's not in the interest of Great Island or the town to like create a lot of controversy over dogs on the island. We want to have a future that everyone can support. We've heard that. We want, the determination that dogs want to be on the island from the community has been sort of a clear majority statement. We were asked to look at, if you take the standard policies around dogs from parks, beaches, etc., and we look at where people eat in the town and we apply them, what would it look like? And so I think it's probably helpful to see this. No, I know. So I hear you about that, Bruce. I think there's also this question which we've struggled with, and I think is not a simple question, which is, as you're thinking about the policies here, what happens now immediately, and then what happens when there's the kind of, let's just say, the realization of the low, which, at the earliest would be 5 years, right? So how we get from where we are now to that, and what are the policies that apply, is something that we're all going to have to continue to be focused on. So that's those are the factors.
When we get to the low, as opposed to now. I mean, I just don't.
I just find it. I mean, I'm not sure who you keep saying you were told to do it. I just don't.
Jim, can I?
Finish. I think right now it's most important for us to be focusing on getting the master plan done, given that we've got like 60 days or 70 days here. And I just think about, like, if we're thinking about like where bikes and kids and dogs and all that stuff should be like 5 years from now, feels like we should kind of come up with the master plan and then design the operating guidelines around the master plan, rather than coming up with the operating plans and then building the capital around that.
Okay, Jim, can I just jump in here? The discussion about where sensitive areas are, we had that discussion when we were discussing the vote, okay? For instance, we do not allow dogs down by the beach. That was specifically what we talked about at that meeting. How do we address that? So we can, I agree that picnic areas, things like that, but I think by the beach or in wetlands, we do need to address that. I hear you, Dan, that there aren't, I don't know what we do about signs, but as much as we would like to move off this conversation, unfortunately, we do need to address that. And if we're not going to allow dogs in wetlands or dogs down by the beach, we need to make that decision.
But are we allowing people in the wetlands? If you're going to let people in the wetlands, then why not dogs on leashes in the wetlands?
You don't let people in the wetlands. We can't let people in the wetlands either.
Well, Becca, can you distinguish between wet soil and actually things that the Planning and Zoning Commission calls wetlands? Because when you look at, I mean, we have, Lori can chime in, I think, Cherry Lawn, are there any restrictions from dogs going in the woods?
There are not at this time, other than they need to be on leash.
And at Woodland Park, are there any restrictions about dogs going in the woods?
Yes, because dogs are supposed to be on leash and people should be in the paths. I don't think people are really walking off the paths to any great
But
degree.
there's no rule that says people can't walk off the paths or into the, if they decide, into the muddy up to their ankles in the wetlands.
Yeah, I don't think there's any restrictions even in Cherry Lawn about going in the woods off the paths. And you have to, well, because it's just paths from people walking. But I just think we need to, it'd be helpful, I think, Becca, whatever information you gathered when you compare this to make sure this was parallel to what we do in other parks and so forth. I think that would be good. But, you know, my view is nothing has changed and no one proposed any of these changes 60 days ago. So,
I mean, I'm just like very surprised looking at this because we had a vote. We clearly talked about it. Okay, dogs can go where people can go. They just can't go on the bridle trail. Okay, we had discussion about it. We voted on it. We said, then when it went to the Board of Selectmen, we said, okay, but there'll be a couple areas like where people are going to be like picnicking with their kids. That is not what this drawing is. This drawing, like when our friends and neighbors see this, they're going to be like, wait, I thought we were getting to take our dogs like where we go and explore Great Island. That is not what this depicts.
Okay. Well, we do have to figure out wetlands and we do have to figure out the beach area, you guys. I'm sorry. We don't allow dogs on the beach area, on the beaches in town. So, but due to the hour, we're going to take this up at our May 28th meeting because we need to make a decision by June 1st. So, moving on to the next item, discussion of policy recommendations for events on Great Island. So, nice picture, Bruce. Jeff and Lori and team have been working on this. And I think, Jeff and Lori, I think the goal today is to, we don't have to make any firm decisions, but to give Reed Hildebrand a little bit of feedback from us on some of these bigger things that they will then have the ability to incorporate in the community engagement meeting. So I think Lori and Jeff, you took a look at frequency. What else did you look at?
Well, we looked specifically at size, location, and hours. And we're hoping to just revisit some of the numbers that I touched on last time and add to that the location and hours. And then I think, Monica, you said your goal would be to discuss frequency and then who can have events. Yeah,
we'll do that at our next meeting, but let's cover.
Lori, did you have any opening statement or?
No, I thought I'd let you do it.
Okay, well, for size, and this is modeled largely on Highland Farm as well as park policies with some modification. We'd be looking at events in 3 size categories, those under 100 people, those 101 to 300, and those over 300. And Lori and my thought was that for the 100, that could actually be a cumulative total. So depending on where the event was, a 15-person nature walk and one, 23-person painting class in different locations shouldn't necessarily be separated, but we would call small events, which could probably be scheduled and approved administratively, would not exceed a cumulative total of 100 on the island a day. Those from 100 to 300 would be perhaps limited in their frequency. We can discuss that the next time, and perhaps require some higher levels of approval or publishing an advanced schedule. And then those events over 300 might be a little rarer, might require Board of Selectmen approval. But just for your consideration for next time, think about whether those thresholds of under 1, 1 to 3, and above 3 make sense. We didn't want to be overly prescriptive on where the events would occur, but it seemed to us, and I think it was, for me at least, reiterated by the discussion tonight, that the stables, polo field, estate lawn, and possibly the playhouse area might be the activation zones we'd want to be looking at. Understand the greenhouse has some future potential, but there's also a lot of work to do there. So those 4 locations, and we believe that the stables, polo field, great lawn could accommodate those events up to 300 or perhaps more. The playhouse, we might want to cap that at 50, but we'd be relying on you all and Reed to just think about the feasibility of that. And then the hours, which were largely borrowed from Highland Farm, except with one exception I'll get into, is that in the months of September through March, events could be held on weekdays from 6 or 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. or dusk, whichever is earlier. And from April, it would be the same on weekdays, only with a stop at 6 p.m. The larger special events could go till 10 p.m. on a Friday or Saturday night. And then on the weekends, the Saturday events would not begin until 9, and Sunday none before noon. And I think that was it. Did I miss anything from that first group?
No, I think you covered it, Jeff.
Jeff, except on Sunday. So you touched on Friday and Saturday events end at 10, and on Sunday events end at.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. The Sunday would revert to the weekday timing and end at either 6 or dusk, whichever is earlier in the winter months, and stopping at 6 for Sunday.
Okay, so not stopping at 8?
Is that what they have for Highland Farm?
I think for you had for large events, for medium to large events, conclude by 10 o'clock on Friday and Saturday, and 8 o'clock on all other nights. That's for the medium and large.
Right.
Okay. Okay. So, Becca, does this help you?
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody have any feedback for Jeff? I mean, he gave us a lot of information, but it's for tonight, it's to get us thinking, and we can put, I'm sure Jeff and Lori put something on paper and get it out to us. But do you have any initial thoughts right now for Becca, or do you want to? We're not voting on this. This is just. Do you have any thoughts right now that you want to share? Anybody?
I have a question, Monica, just in terms of like what our objective here is. Like, do we think that we need to have a full approved policy, that sort of covers everything before we start entertaining hosting certain events on a kind of one-off basis to start trying things?
I think so. I think we want a policy because it will make life in the selectman's office a lot easier. And I don't think we want to be trying things because my feeling is we get a policy established, and that is our playbook, as opposed to one-offs here and there. Give it a try. And I think we can do this. I know it's a lift, but we have to do it eventually. So I say we put our heads down and get it done.
Yeah, I mean, I think just in terms of, you know, looking at working with historical information we have from the town properties. I mean, first of all, we don't, in the parks, we don't allow people to commercially offer events. So someone can't give tennis lessons on the town courts. They can't arrange a soccer camp or something. It all has to go through Parks and Rec and be booked, you know, and everything through us. So we want to make sure we're very clear, first of all, when we do this, that these are sort of pleasurable things that people are getting together to do. When we look at all of the events or reservations for use of park spaces over the last 3 years, the majority is really private gatherings. Just a lot of family, lot of family parties of all sizes, you know, 15 people, 50, all of that's the majority. The next are a lot of school groups, church groups who, you know, they want to do like story times outside, nature walks, things of that nature. And then we have the handful of the larger events like the 5K, for Brendan fundraiser that we have down at the beach, you know, things like that, the food fair, sort of those large ones. But in terms of historically, what our residents asked to use our properties for largely are family and friend gatherings. So as we talked about that, we kind of use that as sort of the basis of our thought process. Now, maybe Great Island will be different, you know, that's what remains to be seen. But, you know, we kind of try to use the basis of how do we know now that our residents want to use our publicly available outdoor space.
Any other questions for Lori and Jeff? Okay. Lori and Jeff, can you and your team, can you kind of put this in writing for us so that we, you know, we don't have to listen to the meeting again? And then for our next meeting, focus on frequency and who, what we do as far as participants goes. I think Jim's idea about the food truck probably fits into that. And we'll discuss that at the next meeting. Does that give you enough time?
Yes.
Yes, okay. All right. Any other thoughts on early access, early events? Jim, do you have any other thoughts on your food truck idea?
No, just, you know, as I mentioned in the email, I think it would be great, you know, to have a conversation with planning and zoning on one aspect of it, but to start to try some food trucks out there, maybe one day a weekend, you know, for the next couple of months to kind of see how people receive them, see what the take up is, and see if that should be something long term that we should be planning for. But I think the sooner, you know, summer's here, so I think the sooner the better to start some of these things.
Okay. The only thing I would say to that is I think it would be great to have a policy in place before we do that. So let's move forward on that one.
I think we just want to make sure too that we are situating picnic tables near wherever the food trucks would be, and then make sure that we have probably even more maybe trash cans than we originally were thinking about.
Okay. Okay. And speaking of the seating areas, et cetera. So we did file with planning and zoning. I sent an application in, a narrative for the tables and chairs. If anyone's interested, it's going to be discussed at a general hearing on May 13th. If you want to join the the meeting. Kip, next item is Kip logo merchandise. Do you have anything, or do you want to save that for our next meeting?
I'll keep it brief. We went back with a second mock-up, so we're getting that changed for the website, and the hope is to have a sample or two and some mock-ups of the website to look at for the next meeting.
Okay, terrific. And then we didn't touch on the public workshop, but for the public, it's on May 17th. The first session is from 1 to 2:30 in town hall. And then there'll be a shuttle at 2:45 that leaves town hall. And again, thank you everybody on the committee for patience on the RSVP list. And for people listening, this is the last community engagement. There's no survey that will be attached with this. So never too late to join us. And I hope that you will put that on your calendar and come to both sessions. Okay, next item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from March 26th. Lori sent in a couple of corrections. She was not in attendance. In section 1, the first sentence should read, no one from the public. And section 7, those 3 sentences should be actually 1 sentence. So with those edits, are there any other edits, corrections, omissions, anything? Okay, seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the minutes as edited, the March 26th meeting minutes as edited? Kip moves, right? Kip moves, okay, because I can't, Kip, your face is.
Sorry, yeah, go.
Okay, Mark seconds, okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, opposed? Okay, excellent. That's it for tonight. May I have a motion to adjourn? Mark moves. Because you're on the
Did I?
screen.
Okay.
Because you're on the screen, that's all.
Okay.
That's all I can see. Who wants to second?
You gotta say it. Second.
Kip seconds. Okay, all in favor?
Thanks all.
Okay,
Thank you.
unanimous. All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Reed Hildebrand.
Thank you. Bye.